Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video view series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. For this video, I'll be reviewing the holiday adventure, A Caravance Carol, a Fey adventure for Christmas, designed by Andrés Lillo for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. This review has been sponsored by the publisher, and a review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links for your online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. So A Christmas Carol is one of the most famous stories, probably one of the most well-known in English literature. The story of Ebenezer Scrooge and Bah Humbug, the being visited by the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future. It's a really good inspiration to draw from for anything, basically, because everybody should be familiar with this tale. And I want to preface this review by saying that I think I'm in favor of drawing from classic stories, whether, Greek mythology or whatever else, but or more recent, like pop culture stories and tales as well. Rip that stuff off, use it, and the advantage is you and your players all share in that basic story and tale and characters. And then you put a D&D twist on it because you all get to interact with that and basically turn it into a giant, what if. The problem with this adventure is it lacks that D&D twist. It's not a what if. This is just basically a straight retelling of A Christmas Carol. And it doesn't even feel like a D&D adventure. I think you can make a D&D adventure out of A Christmas Carol, but you have to do things with it. You have to change things around and make it at least more interactive for everyone involved, because the way this is designed, it's almost like you, the DM, it's like you're running a play and you're just handing the players the script. And, yes, they're technically involved, but they're just going through the motions of what you told them to do. I mean, maybe they can put their own spin on, maybe ad-lib a few lines or something, but otherwise the story is the story and everyone's just playing their part. And at that point, are we actually playing D&D? Now, you can have a more story-focused, a narrative-driven adventure. I personally am more in favor of balancing, perfectly balanced, as all things should be, in terms of those pillars of D&D, which is role-playing, exploration, and combat. If you want to focus on one of those pillars more than the other, that can be fine, especially if you kind of warn at the beginning, like, hey, this is a very combat-heavy adventure, this is a very story-heavy adventure. But if you're going to literally just do the story, I think that is a problem, and at some point, we're probably not playing D&D anymore. So I'll go through the adventure, but I have some fundamental issues with the way this adventure is designed, which is a shame because I think A Christmas Carol is a very worthy resource to draw from, and I was really excited to see how the designer was going to take that and turn it into a D&D adventure. But that's not really what happens here. So technically it's a tier 1 adventure. It's not a one-shot, it's a mini adventure, but there's basically no real combat, and there's, strangely enough, pretty much no dice rolls whatsoever. I mean, you could play this at ostensibly any level, so that part's kind of strange. Act 1 is your party is just transported to, he's not called Santa, he's called something, it's a weird name, Old Carvis is the name of the Santa Claus figure, and then the holiday is, instead of Christmas, it's Caravance. So Old Carvis, Caravance, although Krampus still has Krampus's name. It's weird the way that some of the names are changed and others are not, even though we all know what's going on here. And he's got little gnomes instead of little elves, which that's fine. They've got cute names like Vanilla Cake and Jam Jar and stuff. So Act 1, you're teleported to Santa's workshop. I'm going to call it Santa's workshop. I forget what it's called. Old Carvis's cabin. Okay. There is some nice bits of how to link some adventures together, such as from Rime of the Frost Maiden or Dragon Heist, but I mean, the easiest thing is just to use the Curse of Strahd thing of just and that's kind of what Rime of the Frost Maiden does. Like, oh, you're lost in a blizzard, and all of a sudden there's this house, basically you just get transported there. That's fine, whatever. The opening act is just the players exploring this, Santa's workshop type thing, and there's no real reason behind it. You don't have a quest. I mean, I guess you can talk to the gnomes, you can explore the space, but I kind of failed to see the purpose behind this entire most of this act. There's a little bit with a candy garden, and like you could ride on a gondola. There's a slide. There's a mailing room. You can meet the reindeers, but nothing. I mean, if your players are proactive and they want to have fun with stuff, then maybe this might be the most enjoyable section of the adventure. I don't know. Or they'll just kind of walk through and be like, okay, fine. Where's the, what are we doing here? What's the motivation? Where's the quest? Who needs the problem? Like, what can we do? um, there's a funny bit with the stories that are all parodies of famous Christmas movies, which is, again, what helped remind me of like, oh yeah, all of these would make really great D&D adventures if you put that D&D twist on there as well. But otherwise, nothing really happens until the end of Act 1, and then Krampus shows up, which Krampus is a very popular figure for these D&D holiday adventures to use. He's kind of the anti-Santa Claus. And there's a whole backstory about how like Santa's in charge right now of what is it called? Caravance. And so he rewards people that are good, whereas Krampus just wants to punish people who are bad. They both kind of have the same, end goal of making people better, but different means of getting there. And Krampus shows up and, says, okay, well, it's evil's time to reign. And you'd think this would be a time for like combat or something, because the goal is for them to escape. And they get teleported to Waterdeep, where they have to fix Scrooge. But there's no combat or anything. It's just kind of it's a cutscene basically, where they escape through a portal. They end up in Waterdeep, and the goal is to fix the most horrible person and turn them good, and then that will prove that people can be good, and that Santa's methods do work after all, and Krampus doesn't need to take the throne and kill all the bad people. So Act 2 and Act 3 are basically just a Christmas story. I mean, the names are slightly changed, but it's Stooge instead of Scrooge. And the players are given like these wands where they can change things around. But the way it's structured is you're supposed to spend the first day, and you've got like a magic item where you can turn invisible, and then you've got a wand where you can like change his memory, modify his memory, essentially basically be the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future. And the players are supposed to literally take the roles of being the ghosts of past, present, and future, as well as, I think it's Marley is the name. It's Manfred in here. It's slightly changed. So there's an alternate version that the designer created that uses the original Christmas Carol names, as well as puts the narration in a third-person past tense, which is actually pretty nice, because it goes along with the whole, like, whimsical story, which was the original, text. And I actually found that one better than what this one does, which is uses a traditional second-person narration for a D&D adventure, and for some reason just slightly changes all the names, like it's Stooge instead of Scrooge, which is bizarre. But I like that we get both versions. Anyway, so the players are supposed to spend that whole day just following him around, following this cranky gnome miser around, and watching him be an asshole to everybody. And essentially, you're just watching a Christmas Carol play out. He's a jerk to I forgot all the freaking names now, because I'm looking at all the alternate names. But he's a jerk to the employee guy in this case. And there's a beggar who's dying and needs money, and he brushes him off and all that. It's just all the scenes that we can recall from the story. And they're not supposed to do anything. They're just supposed to observe and kind of learn about him and learn about why he's such an asshole. And I mean, and most people probably can already meta knowledge, like, oh, well, we know how this goes. And then during the, I guess it's Act 3 at this. So Act 2 is just following him around and learning all that. And then Act 3, he goes to bed. And that's when the players are supposed to take turns having him go through all these scenes from basically A Christmas Carol. Like, I think all of them are from Christmas. I'm not sure. My best context is like the Muppet Christmas Carol and Mickey's Christmas Carol. My generation got really good kid-friendly versions of A Christmas Carol, so that's why it's so well versed for my generation. But on the other hand, I don't know the full context of the story either. In this case, you can learn about his past relationship with a woman that he was engaged to, that left him because he was so obsessed with his work. You can change those events around, and here's the problem. There's no skill checks, and there's no combat, there's no real, it's just story stuff that you're doing. And the only agency the players have is, I guess, you could pick and choose which events you want to focus on and change if you know which events to pull up. But otherwise, there's no real player agency here. Like, you're just kind of going through the motions of the story. So, you can choose to bring up the past love, and then there's a whole scene about that, and then it even gives tips on, hey, here's how the player might want to change that to fix things. So, if people know the story of A Christmas Carol, then they can just make all of those changes. I mean, and really in A Christmas Carol, it's not even that you're changing things, it's just that you are he's being like exposed to all these events and being told by the ghost of like what an asshole you are and all these bad choices you've made. And yes, your life has been, not great to you, but blah blah blah, and that's the lesson that's learned and all this. So it's just really dissatisfying from an adventure standpoint. And first of all, let's go back to Act 2. You're telling me the players are supposed to follow this asshole around and not do anything? Have you met literally any D&D players? You gotta be kidding me. Like, everybody knows how this story ends and how it goes, so they've got to immediately... I mean, what if your players, on seeing Scrooge be an asshole, want to immediately just appear, knock him unconscious, tie him to a chair, and just go Reservoir Dogs on him? Like, there's nothing... That's part of the beauty and terror of D&D, is that you are writing the story with your players. The DM should give the players things to do and motivations and quests and things, and it's up to the players to kind of take that material and run with it. But in this case, the adventure does not allow the players to really run with anything, and in fact, it presumes a lot on the player's part that they are going to play along every step of the way. They're going to sit back and be very passive during Act 2 and just watch, and then during Act 3, they're going to pull up very specific memories and not jack with them. I mean, you got to tell me if they have a wand that can like change. I mean, this could have been a whole Inception thing. You could have gone like, okay, well, instead of having it be like you were scared of being bullied by friends, well, in this memory you transformed into a Tyrannosaurus and like ate everybody, and now you've got. I mean, it's you can. It's very hard to plan what your players can do, and the problem is this gives you such a crazy material to work with, where you're giving your players these godlike powers of changing this person's mind, and you expect them to adhere to the specific story, but you're not putting any kind of D&D twist on here. There's no okay, so here's what I was hoping we would get. I was hoping we would take A Christmas Carol and we would turn it into a D&D adventure. In other words, okay, I'm just spitballing here. We take the Scrooge character and he becomes a party NPC, and you need to each of the ghosts is now a boss in their own dungeon, and you have to go after them, and different scenes, different rooms you explore in the dungeon represent different events in Scrooge's life. And there have been adventures that do this very well, where you have an NPC and you have to go through and make those, and they can actually, they have their own narrative arc, basically, and you can focus a lot on them, but still allow your players to have all that space where they can explore, they can choose what to do, they can choose how to adapt to the party NPC. You had some socialization there. Like, that's turning A Christmas Carol into a D&D adventure. And you don't have to literally use like dungeons and bosses and things. I'm just, spitballing with that, but that at least, you're having both of those things. You're taking that source material, but you're still giving your players a chance to interact and tell the story. But here it's just, you're just going through the motions of A Christmas Carol. I mean, the past, present, and future are all the events that we all know. You see the feast and poor Tiny Tim, whatever his name is in this alternate version. He's dying, and then in the future he's already dead, and then you see the grave and all that. It's all pulled from A Christmas Carol, and there's no... In fact, I literally forgot at one point that I was reading a D&D adventure until we get to the part where it mentions that the Tiny Tim character, he's called Tiny Guy here, is dying from an illness, and they're saving up money so they can take him to a cleric for a greater restoration spell. That was the weird sentence came out of nowhere for me. I was like, oh, that's right, this is a D&D adventure. Like, I literally forgot, because in fact, there's one moment, I believe in all of Act 2 or 3, where there is a single skill check, and that is like an insight roll that almost comes out of nowhere, Because it's all, I mean, you can just roll insight all day long for all these things, and there's no real like point to even rolling that, and it's very strange. There's no dice rolls. I mean, there's no like there's no skill challenges. It's just going through all the story stuff. It just doesn't feel like a D&D adventure, and that is really problematic to me, to the point where even at the end it's like, hey, the designer's like, if you want, you can throw a combat encounter here at the end for funsies, basically, if the characters come back, and especially if they fail in their goal, which, holy crap, went through all this and you failed to just do the right like story things, I guess, because again, there's no like skill checks to fail. I guess you just did a really bad job of retelling A Christmas Carol, and then you could fight this battle of which just it scales depending on what level the players are at, and it's just a random encounter essentially. It's not even, you're not even fighting Krampus. There's no big epic battle here. It's just, if you want to throw a random battle in there, then fine. So I have a lot of misgivings about the way this adventure is designed. It's not that it's badly written. I mean, it's well put together. The design and layout is fine. There's a little bit of artwork in here, which is very cute and nice. I actually really enjoy that. I just have a big problem with the fact that this does not feel like an actual D&D adventure. It feels like we are just retelling a Christmas story. We're giving out scripts to everybody. And the one maybe interactive portion you have is that you're handing out scripts to people and you're saying, okay, in this scene, you can say one of these three things. That's on you. You can choose to go, to fix this or fix that or fix that, but it's got to be one of those things, and you're going to be doing this thing. That's like the one interactive piece that you have. Otherwise, your players are just following along and going along with this kind of pre-scripted event. And it literally just is a Christmas story, bookended slightly by those different, you've got that weird Act 1 where you're exploring like a Santa's workshop type thing without really anything to do. You have what feels like a fun, cutscene, exciting moment as you're escaping when Krampus arrives, but it's just basically a cutscene, and then it just goes into A Christmas Carol, and at the very end, you're just kind of teleported back there, and then they just kind of put you in front of the stand and say, hey, did you fix Scrooge or did you not? And that's pretty much the end of the adventure. So, unfortunately, to me, it is mostly dissatisfying with the design. I do think A Christmas Story is a worthy inspiration to draw from. There's a lot of fun things you could do in there. I mean, you've already got, like, I think this doesn't take that material and provide that D&D twist, though. It just takes that material and just gives you that material again with pre-written scripts and stuff, which I think is not how I would necessarily design a D&D adventure. So let's go over my pros and cons for a Caravance Carol. Pro is that it includes an alternate version with third-person past tense narration, which actually I can click on that right here. So an example of that, let's see, go to 17. So like the future event, you arrive at a humble house. Whereas in here, then the adventurers arrived at a humble house. That's actually really interesting, and I think that goes with the themes of the adventure to the point where, I mean, it's always glad to get options, and that's cool, but I would have honestly probably made this the main one, because that actually does make this adventure a lot different than other adventures. I still would redesign a lot of this adventure itself, but the actual narration tools that you're using, that kind of interesting third-person past tense to describe everything, I think is actually very, very helpful. And yes, obviously it's in, I believe it's in the public domain, so you can just use, Ebenezer Scrooge and all that. I don't know, the alternate names just bug me for some reason. Cons, the fact there's almost no dice rolling whatsoever. It really doesn't feel like a D&D adventure. There's no, again, you don't have to just throw combat in there for combat's sake, but let's face it, that's a big part of D&D, and I mean, rolling dice is a big part, like having all your spells and skills, but the adventure doesn't want you to do any of that. It just wants you to, go through A Christmas Carol. And the other con, basically, is just playing into that, which is that it is a literal adaptation of A Christmas Carol that really lacks player agency. It just wants everybody to just kind of follow along with the script and maybe just kind of pick one or two slight changes and variations on how you would change things, but to me, that's not enough, and it doesn't really feel like you're playing D&D. Final verdict, A Caravance Carol focuses too much on retelling A Christmas Carol rather than providing an interactive D&D adventure. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson, and you can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.